The story begins with an architectural salvage yard run by a guy called John, a place people in the industry often talk about with curiosity. I've never been to their salvage yard. Never been. But what happened next in Drew Pritchard's life made even places like John's yard part of a bigger conversation. In 2024, Drew Pritchard did something that shocked his fans. He sold everything. The fairground boat, the vintage signs, even pieces from Buckingham Palace, all gone. More than 620 items raised $800,000, a staggering number that seemed like a victory on the surface. But it wasn't about money. It was surrender. The affairs, the divorce, the pub ban, the closed shop. Every headline and every mistake led directly to this moment. The king of British salvage, the man who built a career rescuing forgotten treasures, was now selling his soul. And when people asked what drove him to auction off his life's passion, the answer was so emotional that it could leave anyone heartbroken. This wasn't just a business move. This was goodbye. Drew Pritchard's story began long before fame. Drew Pritchard was born in February 1970 in the old town of Conwy, North Wales. He grew up in a small house nestled beneath the shadows of medieval castles, in a place where times were tough and money was always tight. His parents ran a tiny corner shop that barely made enough to get by. And during the 1970s, the entire area was struggling. Jobs were disappearing, factories were shutting down, and many families, including his, had to scrape just to keep warm during harsh winters. Drew was just 8 years old when he started looking at junk differently. While other kids played games, he wandered through flea markets and dumps, searching for lost objects and forgotten stories. By 1978, he had collected over 500 bottle caps, which he used like a kind of currency at school. Some neighbors whispered that he was a strange kid with an odd obsession, but none of them understood what was happening inside his young mind. A huge part of that inspiration came from a secret he carried from his grandfather, a World War II veteran who had smuggled war artifacts back from Europe. His grandfather shared stories about hidden treasures, forgotten history, underground deals, and relics lost to time. These stories lit a fire in Drew that never went out. He began sneaking into old scrapyards and abandoned places. One time, he narrowly escaped being buried alive by a collapsing pile of metal. By the age of 12, Drew had built a personal collection of war items and old coins worth more than $200, and he was already selling extras for pocket money. In the middle of a broken-down town, surrounded by struggle, Drew was quietly building the foundation of something extraordinary. Life at home wasn't any easier. His family earned barely $5,000 a year during the 1970s, which meant no luxuries, barely enough heat, and constant sacrifice. His father worked as a sign writer, painting pub signs using real gold leaf. Drew was just 6 when he began watching him work. And that's when his love for restoring old things truly began. But behind the beauty of those signs was something dark. The paints were toxic, loaded with lead that damaged his father's health and caused tremors. By 1980, Drew saw everything happening around him. At just 10 years old, he began sneaking tools from his father's kit to fix broken toys. He once got electrocuted trying to repair a 1950s wind-up car and even earned himself stitches. He also scavenged neighbors' trash for broken bicycles, storing them in the backyard until it looked like a miniature junkyard. Things got so cluttered that people complained about rats, but Drew couldn't stop. By age 12, he had fixed and sold around 50 items at local markets, making more than $300. His father's way of mixing art and restoration left a deep, lasting mark on him. But Drew didn't always understand the risks he was taking. He used harsh varnishes, toxic glues, and chemicals that were dangerous to breathe. Then, in 1982, disaster struck. A flood hit their family shop and destroyed more than $1,000 worth of stock. While his parents cried in frustration, Drew jumped into action, salvaging everything he could. That moment showed exactly the kind of man he was destined to become. School, however, was a different story. Drew began studying at Yscol Aberystwyth in 1975, but academics never clicked for him. By 1980, he was in the bottom 10% of his class, though no one understood that he had dyslexia. Teachers assumed he was lazy or distracted. What they didn't realize was that Drew spent most of his time chasing adventures. He skipped over 100 classes in order to explore old slate quarries. In one quarry, he discovered a hidden World War II bunker filled with dangerous objects. Terrified of punishment, he reported it anonymously. Art was the only place where Drew truly shined. His sketches of decaying Victorian buildings were so impressive that in 1983 he won a regional art prize and $50. But danger followed him everywhere. In 1984, he fell through the rotten floor of an abandoned mill and broke his arm. He hid the injury to avoid being banned from exploring. By the age of 15, he had explored more than 40 abandoned places and collected artifacts worth around $500. He drew treasure maps, led classmates on wild hunts, and walked a fine line between adventure and expulsion. But these risky explorations built a bold, fearless spirit that would one day help him become a millionaire. At 15, Drew found his first real job, working part-time at a car restoration garage in Llandudno. It was 1985, and he earned $2 an hour during long, greasy summer days, surrounded by sparks, metal, and engine fumes. He learned to fix classic cars, including rare 1950s Jaguars. By 1986, he had helped restore 20 cars, but the garage was full of danger. A welding accident left his hand badly burned, a scar he still carries. Around that time, he restored his first piece of old furniture, a 1920s oak chair, and sold it for a $100 profit. The garage owner, a former race car driver, told outlaw stories about smuggling car parts, stories that fueled Drew's imagination even more. By 16, he had saved $800 and spent it on proper tools. But he didn't know the garage was tied to illegal activity. In 1987, police raided the shop, seizing $10,000 worth of stolen parts. Drew walked away immediately, but the skills he learned there shaped his future. That same year, 1986, Drew found the item that changed everything: a dusty Victorian gas lamp buried under 2 tons of junk in a local yard. It turned out to be an 1880s antique designed by William Sugg. Drew sold it for $50 and used the money to buy better tools. He salvaged 15 more items that year, earning around $400, but the yard was filled with asbestos. Drew later admitted he feared the long-term health effects of working there. He continued learning from an old junk dealer who taught him how to look deeper, how some objects hid compartments that smugglers used to transport gems. Drew's parents didn't support his growing obsession. After a heated argument, he packed a few things and lived in his van for a week, but he kept going. By 1987, he had made more than 50 deals, earning $2,000 selling restored antiques. At a time when youth unemployment in Wales was nearly 15%, Drew had already carved his own path. By 1988, at 18 years old, Drew stepped fully into the world of antiques. No college, no formal training. Instead, he became an apprentice for a stained glass restorer. The job began with simple tasks: cleaning dusty vases, carrying heavy doors. But everything changed when a van arrived one day labeled architectural antiques. In that moment, Drew realized he wasn't just working. He had stumbled into a hidden world filled with secrets, craftsmanship, and rare objects. Over the next 7 years, Drew restored stained glass windows, grand fireplaces, and architectural relics from old mansions. He didn't just learn restoration, he mastered the art of seeing value. Also, in 1988, Drew made his first solo buy, a set of broken Georgian chairs for $100. He spent weeks repairing, sanding, carving, and restoring them until they shined again. He sold them for $300, which proved beyond doubt that he was on the right path. But that entrepreneurial spirit went back even further. At 12, he traded school dinner tickets for boots, listened to punk bands like The Jam and Madness, and dreamed of turning small wins into big moves. That same instinct helped him open his first small showroom by 1993, just 5 years later, marking the beginning of the empire that would one day make him famous. Then came 1990, a year that quietly changed everything. At just 20 years old, Drew did something most people his age, and even many older, would never attempt. He took his old, worn-out van, packed almost nothing, and drove all the way to France with barely any money and absolutely zero French language skills. His goal wasn't a vacation. He went treasure hunting. He wandered through markets in Normandy, scanning every stall until he found rare Art Deco lamps and furniture, all for under $500. The real miracle was that he somehow managed to get these fragile items back to Wales, even though customs officers heavily questioned his unusual cargo. He had no proper paperwork, but his natural charm carried him through. When he returned home and sold the items, he tripled his money. That trick didn't just make him cash, it opened his eyes to the bigger world. He realized he wasn't just a local picker anymore. He began buying from places like Norway and Na, slowly building a network that stretched across Europe. But not every deal was a win. In 1991, when Drew was only 21, he faced a painful setback. A shipment of French ceramics arrived completely smashed, and he instantly lost $500, a huge amount for him at the time. He had packed them poorly, and everything was ruined. It felt like a punch to the gut. That money meant everything back then. But instead of quitting, he gathered the broken pieces and turned them into mosaic art, selling them at markets and turning disaster into something unexpectedly beautiful. By 1992, at just 22 years old, Drew had managed to secure a small stall at Conway Market. He sold mid-century furniture like old teak tables and retro chairs, often buying pieces for $20 and selling them for triple the price. Even though he had no formal education, he already had a local circle of 50 regular buyers. He still worked on stained glass restoration too, juggling both jobs even in freezing weather. He woke up before dawn to reach fairs like Newark early, searching for treasures long before the public arrived. It all reminded him of his childhood days when he sold bike parts by the roadside just to buy sweets. In 1993, when Drew Pritchard was only 23, he opened his very first antiques shop in Conway, North Wales. He had nothing but a $2,000 loan from the local bank and a dream that wouldn't let him rest. After completing a 7-year apprenticeship in stained glass restoration, he began searching for old, forgotten pieces from crumbling buildings. In one daring moment, he even entered a condemned church in Holy, where he pulled out rare stained glass windows designed by William Morris, pieces worth thousands. The building was falling apart around him, but he took the risk. By the end of that year, he had made a $5,000 profit. Things weren't always smooth, though. A rival tried to destroy his loan by spreading lies that Drew didn't know what he was doing. Even so, his shop became a local favorite. People restoring old houses or building new ones came to him for real, original pieces, and his little shop even drew more visitors into the town. By 1995, Drew changed his entire approach. He began working with demolition crews across the UK. Before old buildings were destroyed forever, Drew would buy the valuable pieces inside. Once, he spotted a set of 19th century stained glass windows in a van, bought them for $800, and discovered they were designed by Edward Burne-Jones and worth $2,600. He sold them quickly and doubled his money. But the work came with danger. At one site, workers helping Drew gather old iron pieces found a live World War II bomb. The discovery shut the entire site down for days and cost Drew $1,000 in delays. Still, his collection grew stronger. He started saving giant wooden beams from collapsing barns and cast iron radiators from empty factories. He was now rescuing more than 50 tons of old materials every year, becoming a favorite among London designers. Then came a painful setback in 1997. Thieves broke into his shop and stole $1,500 worth of antiques, silver candlesticks, brass pieces from an old Liverpool shipyard, and more. The break-in happened on a foggy night, and the thieves used crowbars to smash their way inside, leaving everything in chaos. Drew was devastated. Insurance paid only $800, and he almost went bankrupt. Eventually, police discovered that the thieves were locals, and some stolen pieces were found in a nearby pawn shop, but less than half were recovered. Drew vowed never to take such risks again. He invested $2,000 into new security systems and moved part of his collection into safer storage. He even began buying heavy-duty safes to resell, which became a small side business. That same year, antique shop theft went up by 25% in Wales. But Drew refused to give up. By the year 2000, everything had changed. His business had grown enormously, and he was now making $50,000 a year. He had fallen in love with industrial salvage. He pulled old lamps from Manchester factories and machine parts from Scotland shipyards. Once, he bought a giant 2-ton engine lathe for $500. After repairing it, he sold it for $4,000, an 8 times profit. Not all rescues were easy. Once, a warehouse roof almost collapsed on him while he collected vintage signs. He escaped just in time and saved 100 enamel signs. His client list tripled, and even celebrities started buying from him. He now had 2 assistants and was handling over 1,000 pieces every year. But the work had risks. He was once fined $2,000 for collecting without permits. Still, people began calling him a junkyard genius, and by the end of the decade, his net worth had surpassed $1 million. In 2002, he got his biggest break yet. A major London hotel hired him to supply antique lights. Drew found 50 vintage lamps in old warehouses and made a $10,000 profit from that single deal, about $18,000 today. One of the buyers was a famous actor, which opened the doors to more elite clients. These lamps were beautiful Art Deco pieces from the 1920s, rescued from a forgotten theater. But entering this world also exposed Drew to fake antiques and shady dealers. Still, that one deal tripled his yearly income and pushed him into the high-end scene. His competitors weren't happy, and rumors began swirling that people were trying to block his access to suppliers. By 2004, Drew wrote an article titled "Salvaging Industrial Heritage," and it shocked the public. He explained how many valuable old machines were being destroyed in scrapyards, revealing that 70% of the UK's industrial sites had vanished between 1990 and 2000. In the same year, he saved an 1850 steam engine worth $50,000 just before it was crushed. His article made national news. Foot traffic in his shop increased by 150%, and although critics claimed he was glamorizing junk, his message helped save 12 historic sites from destruction. His voice was finally making real change. Then, in 2005, Drew took another bold leap. He started selling antiques on eBay. At the time, eBay was full of fakes. Nearly 40% of antique listings weren't real. But Drew took the chance anyway. He found a beautiful 18th century grandfather clock in a Welsh attic and sold it for $5,000 to a buyer in New York. The listing sparked a frenzy with 22 bidders, and the clock, engraved with markings from 1760, finally sold at an astonishing price. Right after the sale, someone tried hacking his account, but he caught it in time. His online sales doubled that year. Traditional antique dealers were furious and even boycotted him, but Drew didn't care. He had opened the antique world to buyers everywhere. In 2006, Drew turned his attention to something deeply personal, his Welsh heritage. Big auction houses like Sabes were dominating the market, and since Drew couldn't compete with their size, he chose to be different. He started collecting slate furniture and items from old Welsh buildings. One table from Snowdonia sold for $3,000. Slate was rare at the time because mines had closed and prices were rising. Drew's passion for Welsh history helped save 15 old quarry sites from becoming housing developments. But trouble followed him. Someone vandalized his warehouse, causing $2,000 in damage. Later, he learned that a black market group was selling fake Welsh antiques. Police eventually recovered $100,000 worth of counterfeit goods. Drew was no longer just a dealer, he was defending a culture. In 2008, Drew took on a huge restoration project, a 50-piece Georgian furniture collection for a major museum in London. The work took 6 long months. One chair from 1780 even contained a hidden compartment with letters from the American Revolution worth $20,000. The entire job earned Drew $15,000 and caught the attention of BBC producers. But there were challenges. One of the items turned out to be a forgery, nearly ruining the entire exhibit. Still, his work rescued fragile furniture that had been rotting away in storage. And then, everything changed in 2011, when Salvage Hunters aired for the first time on Quest TV, turning Drew Pritchard into a household name and forever transforming his life and career. The show became a hit right from its very first night on air. Drew had traveled deep into the Scottish Highlands, where he discovered a pair of cast-iron garden urns sitting forgotten at an abandoned estate. Using his negotiating skills, he talked the seller down from $1,500 to just $800. Later, he sold those same urns for $2,200. The lamp was tied to a scandal involving a Belgian noble from the 1920s. Viewers loved the drama, and his followers grew by 150,000. But with greater success came greater risks. In Germany, Drew nearly got into trouble over a $4,500 clock. In Hungary, he bought a vase that turned out to be fake, losing $500. Still, the show became a global hit. By 2014, Drew and his friend John T. cleaned out a warehouse in Cambridge where they uncovered a 1920s Norton motorcycle buried under layers of dust. They bought it for $3,000 and later sold it for $15,000. The motorcycle had once belonged to a World War I veteran, but there was an unexpected twist. The building had stored weapons during World War II. Because of that, filming was delayed due to safety checks. That episode proved just how dangerous this job could be. By 2015, Salvage Hunters had reached its 100th episode. In New York, Drew found a black beetle sculpture and made a $1,200 profit. His net worth soared to $8 million. But his personal life began to crumble. He was involved in an affair with a married woman, which led to a pub fight in January 2015. The woman's husband was fined $1,140, and Drew himself was banned from local pubs. Surprisingly, the scandal didn't damage the show. Ratings climbed to 1 million viewers. In 2016, Drew sold his old warehouse and moved part of his business to Gloucester. This was a huge shift because he had always operated out of North Wales. The move happened during a time when his marriage was falling apart. He and Rebecca divorced in 2017. But even then, in York, Drew found a black beetle sculpture and made a $1,200 profit. His net worth soared to $8 million. But his personal life began to crumble. He was involved in an affair with a married woman, which led to a pub fight in January 2015. The woman's husband was fined $1,140, and Drew himself was banned from local pubs. Surprisingly, the scandal didn't damage the show. Ratings climbed to 1 million viewers. In 2016, Drew sold his old warehouse and moved part of his business to Gloucester. This was a huge shift because he had always operated out of North Wales. The move happened during a time when his marriage was falling apart. He and Rebecca divorced in 2017, but even then, his sales grew. That same year, he supplied items for a big restoration project and earned $15,000. By 2023, his business was valued at $9 million. In 2017, he also supplied antiques for a period film and made $20,000. Some of the items came from Norwegian manors. Unfortunately, it was also the year his decade-long marriage officially ended. In court, Rebecca received a share of assets worth $5 million, including the chapel they had bought in 1995 for only $200. Despite the turmoil, Drew kept working. He opened a new shop in Conway, which began attracting tourists and even celebrities like Marco Pierre White. Around this time, he also began forming ideas for books. In 2018, he released a book on how to restore antiques. It featured stories from his career, including restoring items from Buckingham Palace in 2011. The book sold 10,000 copies during its first month and earned him $50,000. This helped him recover from a failed auction where he had made only $5,500 instead of what he had expected. At the same time, he had to pause renovations on his house due to lack of funds. He had completed only 2 floors, so Drew returned to online sales and revisited the scrapyards he had loved as a child in Conway. The book made people see him as a true expert, which eventually opened doors to spin-off shows like Salvage Hunters, classic cars. Drew had first met Rebecca in 1998. She was working for a real estate firm at the time, and something between them just clicked instantly. They married later that same year, and in 1999, their son Tom was born. Life moved fast, but they always found joy in even the simplest moments. Their child wasn't just raised in a home, he was raised in a world of antiques. As a toddler, little Tom would polish silverware while his parents worked. By the time he turned 5 in 2004, he could already tell the difference between real and fake items. What started as a way to save on childcare, around $500 a month, turned into a beautiful family bonding experience. When Drew began traveling more to source items, Rebecca remained at home, raising Tom mostly on her own. Quiet tension slowly began growing between them. In 2003, they welcomed their daughter Grace. At this point, the family lived in a beautiful old chapel Drew had bought in 1995 for only $10,000. The chapel had been abandoned, but Drew transformed it into a warm, eclectic home filled with $50,000 worth of salvaged treasures. One of these finds was Mick Jagger's old toilet, which Drew turned into a flower planter. Odd, yes, but somehow it fit perfectly alongside everything else. Grace's nursery was decorated with 19th century fabrics. By 2005, the kids played among antique furniture and vintage finds like it was completely normal. But behind the charming image, the family struggled. In a 2019 interview, Drew admitted that in 2004 they nearly went bankrupt. Renovations had cost over $20,000 more than they had planned, and it almost destroyed them financially. In 2005, Rebecca officially joined the business. She had previously held a major fashion job in Hong Kong, earning $80,000 a year. But after flipping one vase for a $5,000 profit in 2004, she realized she had a natural talent. Her eye for antiques helped the business grow quickly. By 2006, profits were up 30%. She could look at an old sofa, value it at $1,000, and it would sell for $3,500. By doing restorations herself, she saved them $10,000 a year. But in 2007, the partnership became strained. One of her valuations clashed with Drew's instincts, and they lost $2,000 on the deal. The mistake hurt their trust, though they continued working together. They appeared in more than 100 episodes of Salvage Hunters and remained a strong team. By 2010, the family turned vacations into sourcing trips.